So I created a spreadsheet and I decided to poll all of you guys. Now, this happened a couple of weeks back. I thought it'd be a pretty interesting idea for a video to go ahead and poll the entire community and see, just who everyone's favorites actually were. The catch was you could only vote once. So this was a list including every single servant in the game. And the idea behind it was just, again, that we're just gonna kind of get down to the absolute favorites that people have. If they could only pick one, who would they pick? And it's been a really interesting poll nonetheless. We actually ended up with over 400 different responses in this actual poll. And while I know that's not going to be enough to really indicate the entire community at large, it's still been an eye-opening experience, and who knows, maybe we'll do more polls into the future and we may actually get more results. So maybe we can achieve something closer to an actual consensus within the community. That being said, I do think we can still discern quite a bit of interesting little nuggets from this. So on this second sheet over here, I actually asked Bob, who helped me with this poll, to kind of tabulate some of this and put it into sort of proper classification so you guys can actually see, as we have certain other things that I wanted kind of categorized here to actually be. And the general takeaway is that there are some very, very, very popular characters in the game, but of the 400 plus responses we actually got, I think, what was it, Bob? Was it 130 something unique responses, I believe? There was quite a bit. I remember you told me the number, and I now don't remember what the number was. 148, according to this. So 148 unique responses to this poll. That's pretty crazy if you consider it, because I think a lot of the times as we look into the community, we see a lot of bandwagoning going on, frankly. You see a lot of people that are just like, oh man, I really love this character, I really love that character. And people have a tendency to kind of get pretty cult-like with it, and it's actually kind of funny. So seeing that there were, again, kind of gun put to your head, like what are you gonna pick, and seeing that we actually got 148 different responses is actually kind of wild. Like, I did not expect that. I thought we'd see a lot more clumping than we actually did see. So that was already just right there from the initial results apparent to me. And we could actually see this because on the poll itself, as the results were coming in, it actually displays a pie graph for you. And the pie graph got pretty crazy. I'll send an image over to the editor to get him to put it in the shot right here. But like, oh my God, there's just so many different options that people chose. So we tried to tabulate everything and get it into some more interesting numbers that we can kind of work with. Of those, the first one that we tried to look at here was the overall class count. And interestingly enough, while it wasn't the most popular like I expected, I actually expected Berserker to end up being the most popular for a lot of people for a couple of reasons. But I think a lot of this, when you're just kind of taking a poll, didn't boil down to gameplay. It actually boiled down to the characters that people love. And so instead of it being something like Berserker, it actually ended up being Saber was the most popular. And this came in at 62 of the 404 possible votes, with actually it being roughly 15% of the overall votes were for Saber class servants. From there, it was Lancers at 59 of the 404 votes, or roughly 14.6% of the vote. And Berserker then coming in third at 52 votes at roughly 12.87%. So it was definitely an interesting sort of layout there. I actually over time have tried to tell people before, it's like, I think the Lancer class actually does have a lot of people's waifus in it. You see it kind of all the time where a lot of the characters in that class, somebody usually has a Lancer waifu if you go and ask them. But I do think that's partially reflected here. But again, you're not going to be able to get like the obvious sort of kickback of like, well, you know, after their first most favorite servant, who's the next servant that they really like, because they only had the one choice. So this really was just people kind of having to go out on a limb and choose their individual one here. From there, it actually looks like Avenger comes in next highest at 35, or basically 8.66%. And then it kind of begins to trickle down from there. Foreigner with 29 of the votes, Archer with 28, Assassin with 27, Caster with 25, and then pretty much into the lower ones like Rider with 22, Alter Ego with 17, and it looks like Beast actually coming in strong there with 14 of the votes, considering how much more of a new addition to the game Beast is. That's pretty much all just being powered by our two Beast servants, Draco and Space Arish. So really interesting at this point in time, and who knows, maybe we'll get more Beasts in the future. But it's really interesting to see how popular Beast is, despite how new it is in that regard. And interestingly enough, but not surprising to probably anybody, Shielder came in as the least popular, but it actually managed to acquire 4 votes. So 4 of you out there are true MASH soldiers. So in that regard, definitely doing your girl proud there by almost managing to beat Pretender outright. And from there, we decided, you know, like, hey, another really cool, interesting aspect to look at would be like the overall faces. And this was something I think that's been debated a bunch in the community. I'm going to go ahead and disclaim that my community has quite a bit more bias as far as communities go. So I'm a huge saber face lover, so I fully expected there would be some amount of skewing given everything that kind of goes on in my community. So I'm not surprised at the results here in that regard, maybe so much as just how much the slant was. Now, you got to keep in mind, saber faces are a really huge niche. That is to say, there are not just Artoria there, you've got John in there, you've got Okita in there, you've got Umu in there. So there's a ton of people that count towards the saber face niche, and that is going to be one of the reasons why it is so skewed. If we just included Artoria, these numbers would be a lot more human and down to earth, but you'll see there's some interesting tidbits there in that. So Saber came in at 97 of the potential votes there, of which we recorded basically roughly about, I think it's 169. Hold on, let me see. There's 141 between Saber, Rin, and Sakura for the total votes there. So 97 of the 141. So, you know, again, more than 2/3 at that point. You're looking at basically almost 69% nice of the actual like vote being for a saber face. So I'm not surprised that Saberface is won. I'm surprised by just the sheer amount that they did win. I expected this would be way closer to being like split into thirds. Rin and Sakura each tied at 22 responses. So these are anybody that made up a Rin face or a Sakura face in that regard. So perfectly balanced, as all things should be, right there, with the 15.6% of the responses being for both of them. And definitely an interesting thing to see that yeah, basically the community, at least as far as the people that responded to me, were pretty evenly split between those two. But those weren't the only the only faces that we looked at. I also compared Tamamo faces to Umu faces. Tamamo came in with a slight edge with 14 votes in her favor to Nero's 13 specifically for her. So right there, Tamamo just ever so slightly eking out her competitor from Extra there by taking 51.85% of the vote in the presidential election, so to speak, of the Extraverse. And then I also compared the, let's see, how do I put it? The two the two red line faces, if you will, or Guda Guda faces between Nobu and Okita. Nobu actually came in with 8 of the votes to Okita's only 5. A little bit of a poor showing on Okita's part, but it is what it is, and I don't blame people for being as big of a fan as Nobu as they are. Nobu has definitely weathered the storm, so to speak, so the Nobu fans that are still sticking around doing her proud, props to you. And then Shiro himself actually managed to net 6 of the votes, as to say any sort of Shiro face included in that. Another interesting metric that we began to look at here was how many of these votes actually were for summer units as opposed to maybe their normal variant. This was actually pretty surprising. It was not nearly as much as I expected it to be. That is to say, summer servants only amounted to 52 of the votes on the entire response list out of 404 responses, equating to about 12.87%, which means 87.13% were for non-summer unit variants. So again, the original variants of a unit. Again, like I said, that just surprised me. I expected summer units to be way more popular in this regard, but I think this is just, hey, you can only vote for one, so a lot of people just went with the original form rather than maybe going with the summer form. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me in the comments below. I'd be curious to hear what you guys' thoughts are on that one. And so, again, between that, we also looked at the demographics of how many of the votes were for male versus female servants. And this one is an actual pretty eye-opening number, and I think it really speaks volumes a little bit about maybe why FGO is shaped the way that it is. I see a lot of discourse all the time about like, oh, well, you know, like people don't really care too much about the male servants. They don't do them justice, and that's kind of the reason why they're less popular. But I don't really think that's the case. I think we kind of see here that this IP is predominantly for a lot of, you know, like interest in the female characters. It doesn't mean that people don't idolize Shiro and stuff like that, or really love Gilgamesh and things. It's just that it does appear like the vast majority of the popularity is on the side of the female characters, and we kind of see that here. Doesn't mean that they don't maybe like additional characters in addition to the one that they chose, but it does mean that push come to shove, they chose the female character as their favorite, with females taking a whopping 347 of the 404 votes, roughly 86% of the overall total belonging to female characters, as opposed to only 57 votes for male characters, coming in at about 14%. Another interesting one too is, rather than just comparing the faces, we actually compared the top overall results. And this was a particularly interesting one to see as we began to merge units of multiple types. So if we had multiple variants of, say, a Arturia face, we merged them all into Arturia. If we had multiple variants of a John face, we merged them all into John. If we had multiple faces for Ereshkigal, we merged them all into one. And when we did that, you can actually see, of the overall 404 responses, Arturia actually managed to pull a whopping 9% almost herself. So she got 35 responses just between her different variations. And if we actually go back and compare that to the earlier comparisons amongst the faces, even if you weeded out literally all the other Saber faces, Arturia would have still won compared to all the variants of Rin and Sakura, which was an interesting observation nonetheless. Again, I'm going to assume some of that is due to the bias of my community, but I don't think it's crazy to say that this is probably why Saber faces do just keep getting released. I think the devs know it's kind of where their bread's buttered. There's a lot of people that like and roll for the Saber faces throughout the years. Morgan Le Fay actually came in at the second most popular, with her having 19 of the votes, or roughly about 5% of the vote. Joan of Arc and all of her variants, including the altars, managed to grab 17 of the votes, Ereshkigal also coming in, tying for that third place with 17 of the votes. Shisho herself managed to garner about 16, tying with Musashi for 5th place. And Tamamo ended up getting the 14 votes that we revealed earlier, with Umu getting 13. Melisson came in just behind them at 12 votes, and Gilgamesh, the only male in the top 10, managed to garner 11 votes across his different variations. So definitely an interesting thing to say the least. The sheer singular most popular voted for character was Morgan Le Fay Berserker at 18 votes. That's non-merged whatsoever. Jalter at the second most popular at 14. And surprisingly enough, Shisho Lancer with 13. I did not expect her to be that popular because it feels like a lot of people really just don't talk about her very often. She's definitely worthy of it, and I'm happy to see her so high on this list. It was a pleasant surprise nonetheless to see her being this popular. Ereshkigal was your 4th most popular on her own, the Lancer form, at 11 votes. Gil Archer coming in at 10 votes for his form there. Miyamoto Musashi Saber with 10 votes, and Melisson Lancer also with 10 votes. Kama then coming in as her assassin form, getting 9, and the original Artoria at 9 votes herself in the 10th slot for most popular characters, with an honorable mention to Draco right on her heel with 8 votes. Just for one last little bit of observation here, we did kind of compare the numbers from each Singularity. Event units are by far and away the most popular variation, and that's definitely not, to say the least, the craziest thing ever. I think we just kind of merged all event characters into one, because trying to detail where each character came from in each event was probably a little bit too much. But they came in with a whopping 131 of the votes, whereas we do at least end up having here a tie pretty much between Avalon Le Fay, aka LB6, and Babylonia Singularity 7 from part 1, each getting 40 votes across their origination units. These are units that are coming specifically from those story chapters where they first appear. And then from there, we end up with Fuyuki getting 26 of the votes, as well as Orleans getting 20 of the votes. So not too surprising, since so many units are technically directed to be from there, regardless of maybe their not actual involvement in the story. From there, you actually end up having London coming in with 18 votes and America with 15, as well as LB7 ending up taking 12 of the votes, and Archetype Inception getting 7 of the votes. So really interesting. Camelot also, oh sorry, I did skip that. Camelot managed to get 10 of the votes right there, but it is an interesting thing to see just how spread out these numbers were across all of the various singularities, and how regardless of the origin of a unit, it really felt like FGO units as a whole are pretty beloved, that even if there is a sort of one-off servant, it's probably somebody's favorite. I think that's the big takeaway from this. And so while obviously there were some characters that we expected to be at the top as the most popular, there were definitely some surprises. Let me know what you guys think and which one you guys thought was the most impressive. I will actually end up including this little spreadsheet here just so you guys can see it in the link in the description, so make sure you guys check it out if you want to go over the stuff in a little bit more fine detail. But I thought it was a pretty interesting poll nonetheless, and we will definitely have to do some other ones in the future. If you guys have a good idea for a poll, let me know in the comments below. I'll be sure to read your comments. And thank you again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys for the next video. Oh my god. Somebody else voted bunny with me. Yes! Last I checked, it was just me. Found the creamy vote.